So I want to apologize to everyone to start off. I want to apologize to Fitz. I want to apologize to Nate. I want to apologize to you. Doing a live show Monday at 10 a.m. after the Super Bowl. Unless I had to, I would not be doing this. For about a decade, I took work off on every single Monday after the Super Bowl because I wanted to enjoy it. Football Christmas should be observed and respected. But James Franklin is speaking to the media tomorrow at noon. We have a policy that we don't do live shows on the same day that James Franklin talks because I would probably die of anxiety having both those live shows happening at the same time or within an hour. So we're doing it today. And we're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about all the things that happened on Sunday here on the show and the people that know the most about those opportunities for Penn State to do things that we can talk about here. Nate Bauer, who is blending into his wall behind him. The shiplap and Nate are becoming one the longer we do this show. Nate, how you doing today?
I'm ill, but we're gonna fight through it. We're gonna get to where we need to be. How are you?
I'm great. Doing well. The vindictive spitefulness was flowing through me all last night, and it was cathartic to watch that Super Bowl. Fitz, probably not as much for you. How are you feeling today?
I mean, as a Washington fan, I'm resigned to it, so it's not really a big deal for me. Super Bowl Sunday, one of the lower things on the tier for me when I'm watching professional football, but I'm just happy with the season I had. I'm happy for Saquon Barkley. I'm happy for Jahan Dotson, Tariq Castro-Fields. Those guys certainly, if there's a rooting interest, it's in the individuals, it's in the kids, as we call them, because they're still kids to me in terms of guys that we covered the recruitments and things like that. So I mean, Jahan getting that close to the first touchdown. Oh my gosh. That was
right.
Cool to see. And then just the replay plays and Tom Brady makes a snide comment or whatever. It's just, he was so close. But to see them celebrating at the end, to see Saquon shotgunning a beer in the locker room is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, that was fun watching everyone celebrate and really let's talk about the game. Let's just have a conversation about the game. Nate hosted us last night on the Blue White Illustrated message board with the conversation thread, but I didn't really get a sense of your thoughts on the game, Nate. And I'll get into my opinions on maybe what happened with Saquon, who got 57 yards on 25 carries. But what'd you think of the game, Nate?
I thought it was a thorough examination of game flow and situational football, like manifesting itself. Certainly the Eagles defense was tremendous and made tremendous plays. Patrick Mahomes made I'm not a huge NFL guy, but made uncharacteristic mistakes. And the fact that they both happened on the Chiefs side of the field, it just, right? Do I think that the Eagles were 40 points better than the Chiefs as a team? No, probably not. But that was the game, right? Yeah. I certainly think they were better than the 18 points that the final score indicated, right? They just, the Eagles, I keep saying, I'm ready to say Penn State as the Eagles because it's so natural.
Yeah.
But no, the Eagles just they put the Chiefs into disadvantaged situations repeatedly and then maximize those opportunities when they came.
Can I make a comparison here, as you did, wanting to accidentally say Penn State? Ohio State moved their left guard to left tackle and won a national championship. The Chiefs moved their left guard to left tackle and got steamrolled. Cheng Ying Feng says, no blitz in setting, just 4. It's much easier to win when you get 6 sacks or whatever they got, when you only send 4, because despite the fact that they were at full strength, the plan at left tackle was clearly a problem for the Chiefs, and it finally caught up with them in the Super Bowl against the Eagles D-line.
I mean, because this is a Penn State football podcast, you think of all the things that we say. Nate talking about turning the ball over in their own territory. You talk about getting home with 4. All these things that manifest wins at that level, manifest wins at all levels. And you look at just the basics. I mean, it wasn't any whiz kid play calling or anything like that. It is those little things like the turnover battle, the penalty battle, all the stuff that every coach preaches. And the Eagles just had it all covered, and it was pretty remarkable, especially for an Andy Reid coach team. who would have thought that they would have been able to foresee some of that stuff, especially with the pass rush, especially with the offensive tackles. Just didn't happen. So, kudos to that, to Sirianni and that staff for getting it done, but it's basics, fundamentals, and everything that matriculates into a win. It's pretty standard across all levels. And I think that's kind of the lesson here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the impact of Saquon Barkley on the game, I think, despite the fact that he didn't get a touchdown and Penn State fans want him to rip off a run, you don't get one-on-one coverage like that unless two things happen. First off, the offensive line is pass blocking and you're not getting home with 4, and then you are forced to send more at the quarterback. And secondly, the plan was to stop Barkley. That was very clear from the very beginning. And one of the things I think when we're going into this game that a lot of people underrate is the Chiefs' run defense. In that, first off, they're good. And secondly, they were dedicating as many players as possible to stop the run, which gives you one-on-one matchups in the secondary. So Jalen Hurts and Jahan Dotson, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith are the beneficiaries of the fact that Saquon Barkley is on the field. We saw this at Penn State where he was able to attract so much attention that it's not a surprise that one of the most explosive times in Penn State football history is when Saquon was on the field and you were able to get those matchups, favorable matchups down the field. Nate, did you have something there in my?
No, I was just going to say that Jalen Hurts in the run game was especially impactful, and part of that is Saquon Barkley, right? The attention that's delivered to him in the passing game even vacated the middle of the field quite a bit.
Well, yeah, Ed says this: if you're running man, so Spags is obviously an all-timer, if not best defense coordinator ever. That being said, did he forget Hurts can run? The scrambles, so you have to make some tough choices. If you're playing man coverage, you are leaving the middle of the field open. And by the way, I did not watch the game last night the way I would have a Penn State game. I was also enjoying myself, had some beverages, was just watching, and the vindictiveness was flowing, like I said. But these are just like my general observations based on how many times you saw one-on-one coverage, and there was so much room in the middle of the field that I think that you are making those choices that you're going to say, okay, Jalen Hurts, we think you'll beat us, but it's not going to be this other guy. So any other thoughts here? I ran it right into the
just from a human perspective. We spent time around Saquon Barkley. We spent time around Jahan Dotson. We spent time around Tariq Castro-Fields. They were always great dudes. I can't speak highly enough. I spent last week actually going through old transcripts. I had a couple of one-on-ones over the years with Saquon. And some of the things that he said, their focus and being free from distraction. When you say that as a 27-year-old, like, oh, okay, you get it. You've been through it. When you look back and realize that he was saying that as an 18, 19-year-old, it's different, right? It's like, oh man, like this guy is hardwired to do all of the things that are necessary for success. And not only is he hardwired to do them, he does them with glee, right? Like he does it with joy. And
right.
So I just think that to see a guy like that reach that level and have that aspiration come true, it is such a glaring example of football as a team sport and the amount of attention that we deliver to individuals in the game, which is fine, right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of performances that demand that attention. Like that's cool, but also you're limited somewhat by the situation, limited or exposed to success based on what surrounds you. And to go so quickly from an abject misery situation with the New York Giants to the Philadelphia Eagles, who had so many other good pieces already in place that he could slide in and be a difference maker and get them over the top. It's very telling, I think.
So the last thing I have here is that I think this is pretty clear at this point now. There are some great team builders in the NFL, but Howie Roseman has got to be the best GM in football at this point, and maybe of this, salary cap generation. Ozzie Newsome, one of the greatest of all time. But if you look at the fact that the Eagles went to the Super Bowl, then got Jalen Carter, the fact that they have Jalen Hurts, who counts for 8% of their salary cap. You know how they get Saquon Barkley in the offseason, and they have Devontae Smith and the best offensive line in football, and they have all these things? Is because they make smart decisions on multiple levels to build one of the most talented teams in football. That was just a non-Penn State conversation thought, but the fact that they were able to get Saquon Barkley, like, you've got to give the architect of that team credit that we're having this conversation about running backs because you can afford Saquon Barkley. That was the whole point the Giants were making, is no one's going to pay him that much money because running backs aren't that valuable unless you've got Jalen Hurts in the read option game in Philadelphia. Hey, Nate, are you still here?
Hello.
What in the world just happened?
I don't know. I made sure not to pick my nose. I didn't know what was.
Fitz, did you do this? Did you do this because I was complimenting the Eagles?
Yeah, I got tired of the Eagles talk, so I bounced. No, the rule of it is when someone freezes, and I'm just coming back into this, so I don't know who froze, but when someone freezes, you don't do anything, and then you X out of the screen, so then just in case it's you. And I wasn't sure who it was going to be, but I wasn't going to be caught in a meme. So I don't know if you got Nate in that, but I'm hopefully we're back, and it seems like we're fine. That was oh boy.
That's our punishment. That's my punishment for talking too much about non-Penn State things there at the end of that conversation. So let's talk about some Penn State related things, or at least some State College related things. Let's talk about some beer. Guys, Anti-Fragile in downtown State College. Great time to go there because off-season hours to me are the best because you get to pick your seat and you get to have a good time talking with people in a comfortable environment. One of the best in State College to go and just hang out. Right, guys?
Absolutely. You want to celebrate an Eagles Super Bowl win? Go get yourself a cheesesteak. John John's, best in town, to go along with the best beer in town. We love Anti-Fragile Brewing. We love their support of us. We actually love supporting them as well. Go down and check it out on Calder Way. The best variety of beer, I feel like, in State College as well. They've also got kombucha. They've got mixed drinks. They've got a nice little atmosphere to hang out. You can go upstairs and hang out on the couches. If you want something a little less formal, it's a wonderful addition. They joined downtown State College in April 2022, and it's been an absolute wonderful addition to the adult community, really, in State College. Not that they don't serve students, but if you go in there, it's definitely a clientele more of our age, which is it's nice to see. So get down there. As the weather eventually will get nicer, it will become more of a outdoor hangout spot. You smell the cheesesteaks, it brings you right in the door, and then you've got the beer there. I don't know what else you could want in downtown State College. So check it out if you're in town for a basketball game, for an ice hockey game, for anything really. I know graduation's in a couple of months now. It's gonna go fast. So if you're in town, check it out. We had some people on the message board say they went down prior to the game yesterday to get cheesesteaks to take home. So it's
good call.
Wonderful call by those guys. So we really appreciate Anti-Fragile Brewing. And again, it's a place we like to hang out. It's a place that we like to not just take their sponsorship dollars from. We actually like to support the product as well because it's a wonderful product.
I actually saw John at Wegmans on Super Bowl Sunday and buying some stuff. I don't know what he's buying. I saw him in his Eagles shirt because he's an Eagles fan. So like all these things they're all real. Like the fact that he's great at cheesesteaks and he's a Philly fan, like it's all authentic at Anti-Fragile. So appreciate them being a sponsor here on the show. Let's get into the main conversation point for today, which is a pretty big one to happen in early February. Penn State losing running backs coach JaJuan Seider, who is moving on to Notre Dame. Those reports came out yesterday. Again, for more detailed insider style information, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is your place to go to get some of the details. And of course, Nate Bauer, you can talk to him about that on the message board for just $1 if you sign up right now, subscribe. And of course, you can decide to choose to join us for a year after a week trial offer. And then we can have you be a part of the family and we can do this more often. But let's talk about JaJuan Seider, the decision to move on, and how all this came together. So, Nate, lead us off on the conversation of, how these things come to happen.
Well, you get headhunted and somebody targets you, and you're either open to that conversation or not. And in this case, JaJuan Seider was open to Notre Dame's pursuit of him. Notre Dame lost its running backs coach. It had a position to fill. And, I think somewhat in the vein of Tom Allen, right? Like there are bigger things, other things, personal things beyond just the professional that sometimes make a change of scene either necessary or welcomed. And so it just, look, like, I think that a lot of times people want there to be right? It's like, oh, well, this is
an event.
This is a lateral move, a scandal. There's right. And I think that if you listen to, and Fitz, you can attest to this, anybody that had a conversation with JaJuan Seider through Penn State's home stretch of playoff games, after those games, he said very retrospective, reminiscent type comments about looking back at Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, their careers, right? It had a feel even then, right? Even in December, even in the beginning of January, it had the feel of a guy who had been through it and maybe had been ready to try something else and see something else. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's kind of what this is. And, for people who do want a little bit more insight, check out the message board, because I shared some of that yesterday that I it's one of those things where it's a little bit more comfortable explaining and providing some of those insights in that type of a forum over YouTube.
Right. Fitz, what's in terms of the impact of an individual assistant? JaJuan Seider's been here a while. He is one of the most famous assistants on the staff in terms of everyone knows about JaJuan Seider. So what is the impact of his decision to leave? Like, how big of a hole is this for Penn State in the broad sense?
I think it's a decent impact. You look at how long he's been here. Second longest tenured assistant. 2018 is that's a long time to be an assistant in one spot at one, and I know he was labeled with the co-head, or what was assistant head coach, co-offensive coordinator, but as the running backs coach for that long, that's a long time. Only Terry Smith's been here longer. And Terry's obviously got connections to Central Pennsylvania State College, Penn State, all those things. So I think that makes a difference in terms of gradually speaking, or on the large scope of things. Running back is a position of talent. Running back is a position where if you've got the guys, you're going to be a really good running backs coach. I look back to Charles Huff. His last year at Penn State was 2017. Saquon Barkley's last year at Penn State was 2017. He got out of here, and Penn State was, it was a complete rebuild in the running backs room. We had talked, actually, I just looked back this morning, looking at our chat from early December. We talked about JaJuan potentially moving on then, because we heard, some things, but I thought they got past that with Nick and Katron signaling that they were coming back. You always think they're going to stay in this situation, just because you've grown to appreciate the continuity. You've grown to appreciate the culture of the coaching staff where, if a guy leaves, it's usually not his own choice.
Yeah.
But you also understand that he's a Florida guy. Now he's going to South Bend, Indiana, which certainly changes the math on that one. But he's a Florida guy with not many connections. He played at West Virginia, coached at Marshall, so loose connections to this area. So to get him for 7 years or 6-7 years, that's pretty ridiculous in terms of time periods. But I will say that, like it's a position that doesn't coach itself. I'm not saying that, but it's a position where the talent rises to the top, and that is how it works. Penn State also hasn't had a running back drafted since Miles Sanders. Now, that's a little bit skewed because Journey Brown would have been drafted, and unfortunately he had to end his career. But still, that's a long time. And if you look at guys around the country, they're having running backs drafted every other year, every 2 years, something like that. So I think that's worth noting. I think the development there is going to give a fresh start for Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Still got the Super Bowl on my mind, of course, with Nick Scott. But I think it's going to give a fresh start to those guys, maybe make them see a little different angle as they go into the pros, and then you got to develop those younger guys behind them. So fascinated to see which direction James Franklin goes, because typically when you're making a position hire, and we saw it with, say, Marcus Higgins a couple of years ago, you're looking regional, you're looking, a little bit smaller. But when you go out and get Jim Knowles, you feel like anything's possible. So I'm very curious to see which direction James Franklin's going to go. Yeah,
Fitz put up a hot board earlier yesterday, almost immediately after all this conversation. So again, a great reason to sign up for Blue White Illustrated, just to get all that information. That I don't want to say instant gratification, because it makes it sound like Fitz didn't put any thought into it. Of course he did. Overall, the idea of, is there a quality candidate out there? And it sounds like you guys are saying there's an opportunity for change and not improvement in terms of getting somebody better necessarily, just a different voice and a refreshed message. So what's your optimism level that Penn State can pull through and find a quality replacement from both the recruiting and from the development side? Fitz, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you can do that. From a development side, definitely. From a recruiting side, JaJuan Seider is a top 5-10 recruiter in the country. Now, the devil on the other shoulder says, in the age of NIL, what's the value of the dynamic recruiter? Like, I know you got to give them the campus and everything like that, but when you're sealing the deal, is it going to be the recruiter? Is it going to be the contract in front of you? It's probably going to be the contract in front of you. So that's kind of where my question lands. But I don't think you're going to match JaJuan with the personal skills, especially down in Florida. Now there's an argument to be made, and we made it last summer, about, how much juice is worth the squeeze down there in terms of getting to Penn State and keeping guys at Penn State. I believe this is probably the conversation we had after the King Mack transfer the first time. So that's definitely interesting. But I think you're probably going to take a hit on the recruiting side of things, but the development, we will very much see, because I think we're so used to the product that's been put out under JaJuan Seider that, we're not sure what the other side looks like.
Yeah. Last question I have here, Nate, and this is one I know you cannot answer, but I think we'll get to more of the recruiting conversation in just a second. But I would say the question to me is, it's not, are Nick Singleton and Katron Allen leaving, but do some of those young players that he's just recruited, are they now more vulnerable to making a move than they would have been previously, given how deep the room is, and given his impact on those young men who have just chosen the Nittany line? So what do you think in terms of like that level of maybe a Corey Smith, Quentin Martin, one of the freshmen that just came in the class of 2025? Is that a concern that Penn State has to ward that off, knowing they have to do that anyway in the spring portal, because that's kind of poaching is kind of the thing now?
Yeah, you're right. If you're asking about guys already in the room, guys who have had a year or 2 or 3 under JaJuan Seider, sure, but that's just life anyway. I think that if you're not constantly on guard, you're like, if you're not paying attention, then you're going to get gutted. But also you can live with it to a certain extent. There's just this, I feel like it's been a strange transition, and I don't have the perspective on how everybody else or every other college football program's fan base feels about it. But to me, this fear of, what if they leave, right? What if they go? Penn State, I think this is fair to say, and Fitz, you can fill me in on the names that are escaping me at the top right now, but Penn State's had a lot of running backs leave over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
I mean, that's the product of 2 freshmen coming in and just wiping out the room. Like 2 freshmen being better than Kevon Lee and, Devin Ford, who actually is at Notre Dame. It's kind of the
Noah Kane.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Keziah Holmes, London Montgomery. Yeah. Like there's been a lot. Yeah. But that's the room. Like that's the position right there. If you're not getting carries,
that's what I'm saying.
It's going to happen.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. It's already that, right? I feel like there should be, to some degree, a built-in expectation that the guys that you bring in, most of them are not going to finish their career at Penn State. It's in a lot of ways, it's like quarterback, right? Most of them, you are looking for the guys, right? If you can get it, if you can have a situation where they get better and go along that process and continue to develop and shine as a junior and a senior, fine. But that's not the norm. That is not going to be what it is for the most part in this game at this moment of college football.
Well, let's discuss the next element in this that I think a lot of people are concerned about, which is, of course, recruiting. Also, Nate needs to blow his nose and drink a hot tea. So we'll be back with more on the other side with Nate, but now we got to get to Fitz's recruiting update. So let's do a quick reset. Penn State football loses JaJuan Seider, one of its top assistants for James Franklin, and as Fitz has called him, a top 5 recruiter in the country. Let's start with that Florida conversation, because JaJuan Seider, Southern Florida guy, brings in a guy from IMG in Katron Allen as one of the keys of his recruiting so far with the Nittany Lions. But as we have talked about, it's not been just those players. Penn State doesn't recruit just by position. They recruit by region and also a lot of those factors that go into it. So Florida, obviously a hotbed in recruiting. How does this impact Penn State's availability, their potential that they have gotten players from down south? How does this impact all of that in your mind?
I mean, you look at what Florida recruiting is, and it's multiple states in a state. So you've got South Florida, which is where JaJuan Seider is revered. Like, he can walk into any building, everybody knows him. He is a guy from the muck, as they say down there. Like, he is absolutely a big time figure down there. That's also the Wild West of Florida in terms of recruiting. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, that region. Penn State fans will be familiar with some of the guys that they've tried to get out of there, and it just doesn't always work out because of Florida is just kind of different than everywhere now. Yeah. Or South Florida is different than everywhere else. You look at Jacksonville as its own area, because it is, that's where, as somebody mentioned, John Mitchell and Antoine Belgrave Shorter, that's where they're at. So that's kind of a different atmosphere there. Same with Tampa, and then the Panhandle, Central Florida. Central Florida is where you got Zane Durant. So losing, and this is just kind of rationalizing it, losing South Florida probably doesn't change a ton for Penn State, especially when you're talking about accessibility, getting guys to campus, and then that's an area where it becomes a bidding war. And Penn State is not a bidding war program right now. It's a developmental type program, and there's going to be guys that they certainly want down there, but that appeal is probably tarnished a bit in that situation. Now, right. Tampa, IMG, even, that's going to depend on the background. You mentioned that they got Katron Allen from IMG. Well, he's a Virginia kid, so that's certainly one of those sort of situations that you got to trace back to where they're from, recruit the parents, recruit everybody, and you get Terry Smith in Virginia. You get I'm trying to think who is in Central Florida right now, because that one's changed hands a couple of times over the last few years. But yeah, that's kind of where you're at. So I don't think you're losing a ton in Florida in the finished product. Like, you always want to be down there, you always want to be recruiting, you always want to be visible and things like that. And JaJuan made that very, very accessible for Penn State. Right. But
He at least opened the door, right? Like you at least had a door. Whether or not you could close the door, you were able to walk through it with JaJuan Seider on your roster, right?
Right. And again, that's mostly South Florida. Like that's mostly from, Lake Okeechobee and down. Like that's per square inch there. The talent there is unbelievable. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's also, not always the fit with what Penn State's looking for. You look at Penn State's roster right now. Elliot Washington is from Venice, which on the West Coast there. John Mitchell from Jacksonville, Antoine Belgrave Shorter from Jacksonville, Zane Durant from Lake Nona, which is in Central Florida. So like those are the four right now. King Mack will be back, and he is from Fort Lauderdale, right. Of course, as well. So it's not, and TJ Shanahan's from Central Florida as well, but it's not a pipeline or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like it's tough. Like even for JaJuan Seider, who's wonderful, as good of a recruiter down there as it is, you still got to get the kids up here. And I think that's the issue that Penn State's going to have to work around. And you're probably just not going to see as many South Florida guys popping up for official visits and then eventually not committing to Penn State, which is kind of
right.
where we've gotten.
They were kind of in that spot anyways, what it sounds like. So I guess I don't want to focus entirely on the negative, but I do want to set up where Penn State was to know where we're going in that sense. So what is the recruiting impact then of losing JaJuan Seider on either a broad sense, on the running back position, however you see this as the most important of where Penn State needs to then find a replacement or find a new gear in some other area to make up for what they're losing to a direct rival, by the way, in recruiting in Notre Dame.
Well, it's really funny because you look at Notre Dame and Penn State and Notre Dame go after a lot of the same type of kid. So I'm curious what, and it's probably easier to get to Notre Dame than it is to get to State College. Not much easier, but like they should be able to get some South Florida kids up. I'm just very curious how much of this move was recruiting and how much of it was just, the allure of JaJuan Seider and everything that he's done. And again, if it sounds like I'm coming down on JaJuan, I'm not. It's just kind of, you can rationalize all this stuff to the value of the position coach in this particular position. But you look at what Penn State has done at running back, and right now their most successful guys have come from Pennsylvania. Saquon, Miles Sanders, Nick Singleton, some Journey Brown, some of those guys. So that, as long as that base is kind of what you found, 5-10 years ago, whatever it is, you can keep working with that because there's some fantastic backs that come out of there. I mean, Notre Dame's top back that they signed in 2025 is from DePaul Catholic in North Jersey, which Penn State got Michael Troutman from there. Like there's definitely I don't want to call it a switch, but you look at what he's recruited in the past, and there was the class with, I believe it was Noah Kane and Keziah Holmes. Okay, yep. Well, those guys are talented guys, but they're a long way from home, and something doesn't work. And unfortunately for Noah Kane, it was his foot, and I think that's a horrible, way that one played out. But it's tough. Like it's tough to convince a kid to come from Florida to stay in State College, to deal with the weather that we're having outside, which actually it's pretty nice out today. But to deal with all of that is really, really tough. And I'm curious how much of a change it will be. And again, you go back to the successful backs that Penn State has had from the state and from the region, you can find another guy to find those guys. And I think that'll be, I think they'll be okay there. Like I said, you're losing the dynamic portion of him as an awesome recruiter, but you can also be a good recruiter and get those guys because they are in your backyard. He's got Messiah Mickens committed in 2026. That's an interesting one because he committed so early. JaJuan Seider is his favorite coach. Absolutely looking at that one and just kind of like keep an eye on it just in case. But at the end of the day, he's still going to be in Central Pennsylvania. So like there's built-in advantages there for Penn State. Keemon Spell is committed in the class of 2027, and you don't want to dive too deep into 2027, but he's in Pittsburgh. So like you've got the opportunity to continue to recruit from your backyard with the pitch of, hey, guy just won a Super Bowl from Whitehall. Like it's like you can do it from Pennsylvania and you can do it in your home state. And that's why it's not just come play for JaJuan Seider. It's come play for Penn State and come play in your home state and whatever they want to say, Made in Happy Valley or whatever they want to say with that. So I think it does. I think on the surface, it's going to have some sort of impact, but at the end of the day, I don't know that the results are going to be all that different.
So let's put that down for now. Appreciate your insight into that. And the running back position generally is, as you mentioned earlier, a position where athletes kind of make it and make or break that position because of their talent. Either that or Nate that mentioned that earlier. So let's talk about the next thing I think of importance, which is your big board, which came out earlier in the month at bluewhiteillustrated.com. I think it was on Friday.
It was on Friday, but it feels like it was 2 weeks ago. So
it does. It really does. So what do you want to tell us about the 2026 big board here in February? Of course, the information, bluewhiteillustrated.com, you can go and get all of it. But what was interesting as you were putting it together? What sort of factors, or where were there some conflict that you think is interesting about putting this big board together?
I always like to take a look at the numbers first to see where it kind of aligns with Penn State's needs. And you look at Penn State's class of 2026, you've got 9 commitments, and most of them are on the offense. 6 of them are on the offensive side of the ball, I believe. So you're looking at defensive heavy, I don't want to call it rest of the cycle, but you're looking at a defensive heavy look at the next 10 months or so. So I'm looking at 4 edge prospects, 3 linebackers, 2 defensive tackles. So you're like 14 guys on my big board of defensive players. So that's where going to be the focus. That's where the focus is going to be. So you look at the potential this group has, and I have a lot of guys on there that are 3 stars right now. And again, I'm going to keep saying this. It's February. Don't pay attention to the rankings right now. Like I click on our site, read profiles, do all that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the junior film is still being evaluated. The junior camp circuit is just starting up. All these things are changing, and you're going to see a lot of changes over the next 10 months in terms of these rankings. And
yeah, because this is
too
sorry, not to interrupt, but like dudes are still growing. Guys who are hitting their growth spurts as juniors, you say things are going to change. Body types are going to change. And that's as this goes, like the early rankings are an indication of a starting point. And I think that's a really good point, which is why we also try to provide the context of what these players are like and what they can do. So I apologize. I totally,
no, it's fine. We got a couple guys on there that don't have rankings right now, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So, but I look at the region, look at the state, look at the region, and it's much better than it was last year. And you have the opportunity at some of these positions, especially at defensive end, especially at linebacker, where you're trying to restock some positions. You're in a pretty good spot if you're Penn State. Now they got to finish them. They got to get these guys on campus, then maybe squeeze out a couple in the spring before you get to the blue-white game, and then get Ryan Snyder's busy confirming official visits right now, and then get to that rush in the summer. But I think Penn State absolutely has the opportunity to do some really good things. We mentioned official visits. Jackson Ford was one that Ryan nailed down for June. I don't have the dates in front of me. I'm not being intentionally obtuse here. Keyshawn Stancil's coming, I think, the second week of June. So you're going to start seeing these guys that are top of the board type guys. And Stancil wasn't even on my big board because it is so crowded with guys that are realistic targets. I had 20 guys on there. I could have gone 30, could have gone 35. Like I'd probably sit down today and say, hey, these are guys that were in discussion, and maybe write that up. And that's actually a pretty good day.
the OLI on the big board. I like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And of course, bluewhiteillustrated.com for all that information. Appreciate you giving us the insight into your into the recruiting from this weekend. And of course, we'll have more of that on the Thursday show coming up for our recruiting show later this week. But coming up tomorrow, you're going to hear more from us, or actually you're going to hear from Penn State football. Winter media availability. This is kind of the official changeover for Penn State. This is when they turn the page to 2025. We get to hear from the freshmen for the first time. We previewed this a little bit earlier in the month, I think, talking about the players and all that stuff. But what are the basic things that you want to hear from James Franklin tomorrow? Because there's been a lot of stuff since the last time he talked, Nate. You are the James Franklin whisperer. We've got Jim Knowles, JaJuan Seider, college football, the changes in NIL. What's on your bingo card for James Franklin that you're interested in hearing about tomorrow? You're on mute.
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's a good start. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Right. Hey, I was away for a little while. No, look, there's just a lot to tackle. And so I think that any prolonged time on any one subject would be probably a waste, because the reality is Penn State, yes, went to a college football playoff semifinal. It has a new defensive coordinator that I think is, there's no other way to put it. Like, it's significant. It's very big. It's a big deal for them to have landed Jim Knowles. Yes, JaJuan Seider. I think the GM position and the future of that is, you're seeing the transactions being made people elevated into roles, people hired into roles, right? GMs being hired away from other places. Like all of this is happening nationally, and there really hasn't been a whole lot on it at Penn State in terms of what they are formally attempting to do. So I do think that that's a subject that is interesting. And then look,
can I rectify an earlier part of the show where I talked about Howie Roseman and then the internet kicked us off? What is the role of the GM in college? Because I feel like there maybe is a misunderstanding or kind of an unknown about what that role actually is. In the NFL, it's more about talent acquisition, and that's what people focus on anyway, is the talent acquisition part. But what is it in college? If the head coach does the talent acquisition, what is the GM doing?
The head coach isn't the only one doing the talent acquisition. I mean, obviously that's a big part of it, but you need a staff, right? That's what they already do. That's already in place. To me, the big thing to figure out, and the big, like the frontier that has not yet been tapped, is how do you budget your money? Especially when you're dealing with something that is amorphous in a certain way, right? Yeah, there's going to be 22 million or 20 and a half, depending on the house settlement, and right, all of those things that have yet to actually been formalized. But even beyond that, you're still going to have the influence of collective money, directive money. There's just a lot of stuff that is going to be up in the air, and money is finite to a certain extent. You can always find more, and you can always work to find more, and you should be working to find more. But how you allocate that money is a big deal. It is a big deal to figure out what your approach is going to be.
So it is a soft cap idea. It sounds like it's similar to actually an NFL GM, where it's not just about the talent, but what you're allocating to what positions and the resources, and playing the numbers game to create the best that your money can buy. I guess how do you view that fits then in the world where not everyone has the same salary cap? How much more work does that person have to do in this situation, in this environment? What kind of job is it?
I don't know that it's more work. So like, we're going to look at the NFL GM as the blueprint here, and I don't think that's accurate, because the NFL GM sort of lords over the coach and provides the talent for the coach to work with. And this one is, James Franklin's still going to be the head of the program here, and the GM is going to do his bidding to figure out all that stuff on the back end. What's interesting to me is you're looking at not a salary cap, but a salary structure management, where, okay, in 2025, Penn State is going to have big ticket items like Drew Aller, Denai Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, all these big numbers. And then in 2026, like, that's going to be freed up. So you have to allocate that for other people, guys that are coming back, but also, guys that are going to come in. So that's going to be like on the table when you're talking about Manny Inacho and Zion Ellie and these other guys in the 2026 class. So like, it's all just a basic juggling of everything. And it's going to be tough because there's no real structure of how it's going to work right now. And also, Nate, as we talked about before, the House settlement's not passed yet. Like, and I'm not sure that it's going to, at least in the current form. So like, I'm very, very curious how that all is going to work out.
Yeah. So is that also the 105 limit fits? Is that part of the House settlement?
Part of the House settlement, which again, I'm very, very much against that part of it in terms of the roster cap, because you're screwing over walk-ons and you're, kind of making yourself, with no injured list, with no practice squad, with no reserve. You have 105 guys on your roster. One of them gets hurt. You have 104 guys on your roster. There's nothing you can do about it. So like it's workable, but it's also not as flexible as it needs to be, especially when you're going to tell 15 walk-ons that their services are no longer required here. Like that's crappy in another way. So
yeah. We'll put that down, and of course, we'll ask those questions, write those stories tomorrow after James Franklin addresses the media. After that, we get a chance to talk to the freshmen. We've previewed this a little bit, so just quickly, Nate, who piques your interest, or what piques your interest from this current crop of 2024 second-year players now, as we get a chance to see and hear and interact with them?
Tyser Denmark.
Just
and Cooper Cousins, but
in general, or what are the just what he's like? You know, where are you in terms of what is interesting with Tyser Denmark and Cooper Cousins?
Just the type of headspace he's in and what kind of opportunity he sees. Peter Gonzalez, right? Where he's at physically. Josiah Brown, right? Like, look,
it's his birthday today.
It's his birthday today.
I just saw a tweet. That's all. That's how I know it. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. It's there are some front and center things for Penn State football to have resolved for the upcoming season, and Penn State's true freshman receiver class is one of them. It is a place where if Penn State is not getting contributions of some sort, I'm not sure I see an avenue toward improvement. I think it's incumbent on some of these guys, at least one of these guys, to make an impact next season. And I know that Denmark is a guy who flashed at times this past season and was probably in that yellowish borderline. Better to keep him as a red shirt, to preserve that red shirt, but also probably could have been used a little bit more if they had wanted to burn that red shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, how does that all play out, and where's he in the process, and go from there.
Fitz, what interests you about tomorrow from getting to know some of those players that you, by the way, Fitz and Ryan and our recruiting staff know some of these players from the recruiting process. So I guess your perspective on, are you interested in where they've developed over the last year? Are you interested in kind of just checking in with guys? What piques your curiosity?
Well, Corey Smith and Quentin Martin were already high on the list. And obviously this is I don't expect them to say anything about Seider and the situation, but like, you know, you still got to ask the question. But there's a lot of interesting guys in that 2024 class. Some of them we take for granted because they've played, like Luke Reynolds and Cooper Cousins and those true freshmen. But like, you look down the list and there's some guys that could potentially be redshirt freshmen, not impact players, but guys in the two deep, guys that could make some things happen. You look at the defensive ends, and Max Granville is always a good conversation. Jalen Harvey, and even Malachi Williams is a guy that, you know, went through a couple of injuries early, and, you know, watched those other two guys play. So how does that affect him? But he's much bigger than he was back when he was a 205-pound defensive end. So like you look at different positions, and there's guys that can certainly break through. Egan Boyer is one that I've talked up for a long time because I think he's going to be a really good player. It's just a matter of getting to the spot where he needs to be from a size perspective, from an experience perspective, and then maybe take over for Drew Shelton eventually. Yeah. So very, very curious to see how that works out. But there's a ton of guys in that 2024 class that makes sense. I know Nate mentioned Peter Gonzalez. That's an interesting one. I'm not sure where he's at and if we're going to see him this spring, but that was a guy that they really appreciated his approach coming into the season. And of course he got hurt again. So that's one for sure. There's a bunch of guys there that really make sense. So, let's look over this list. Liam Andrews. Everybody always wants a Liam Andrews update. We did one on the site last week, and people are still asking for it. So, you know, just
I want to throw this one in here. Christian in the chat says Dejan Lane, and I'm interested to know. I've never spoken to Lane. I just want to get a sense to pick his brain of just want to understand his approach and his perspective, because how smart he is determines how quickly he can integrate into this new offense or this new defense under Jim Knowles. And I'm not, football IQ is kind of an amorphous thing. It doesn't mean that you're book smart. It doesn't mean that you're going to graduate with a 4.0, but there's a lot of overlap in a lot of different types of intelligence. So just getting to know a guy and getting a chance to feel out that sort of process of how his mind works and how that applies to football, I think that's a pretty important one. And I think Christian has a good eye for bringing that up here in the chat.
Christian also had a good eye. He's one of those guys that got the cheesesteaks yesterday. So
nice.
We appreciate that. And building off that, you're looking at guys, especially in the defensive back seven, that are going to have to do a lot of thinking because they are used to Tom Allen's defense. Now all of a sudden it's Jim Knowles' defense, and Jim Knowles values intelligence and knowing where you have to be and being in that spot. So you look at him, you look at Anthony Specky, you look at Antoine Belgrave Shorter. There's a lot of guys that are going to have to make that transition, and it's going to be hard because not everybody can pick up a playbook just like that. So I'm really encouraged to see some of the development for those guys, but it's going to be sort of a fresh start for some.
Yeah, and we'll be getting to a fresh start here. I actually am going to lead off the BWI mailbag because I have a question I want to ask of these guys based on something Nate just said. So let's get to it. In truth, this question comes from the Blue White Illustrated message board as well, but I want to fold in some of the things that Nate just said into this, something that came from the Friday chat that we do each week. Just getting people get to pick Fitz's brain and Nate's brain about a variety of different topics, anything. And someone brought up the idea of different groups of the receiver positions, returning players, transfers, and freshmen. And Nate, you say that Penn State has to get contributions from those freshmen. What's the mix that you think is most optimal for Penn State to have a successful passing game that develops this coming season? Because I have some thoughts on it, but I want to get your perspective on where you think the priorities lie from the development side with Andy Kotelnicki and Marcus Hagans.
I need you to ask the question again. Like,
what is the optimal? What is the optimal mix of transfers, returning players, and freshmen? So, like, can they have 3 freshmen contributing next year and be successful? Because there is a full reboot in the room right now, basically, and everyone wants the shiny new toy, which is typically the underclassmen. But in this situation, I'm just curious of what you think the best mix of players is for Penn State. Transfer heavy, returning starters, Liam Clifford being a part of the conversation. What is the best mix you think of players contributing to create that step forward in the passing game?
Yeah, I think that look, like, have I thought deeply enough about this to feel like this is a fully formed answer? No, but yeah, I think that the transfers have to be hits, right? I don't think they can miss on either one of those guys. I think they have to contribute. Preferably, obviously, to Penn State, one of them should be a star. Right? I mean, it's hard to argue otherwise when you don't have any returning production at the position, and Tyler Warren, the most established receiving threat that you have, is gone. So certainly the tight ends still have more pieces coming down the pipe, and those guys will contribute. But for the receiver position to be what Penn State wants it to be, what Penn State needs it to be, I think Caden Saunders would be a real, I don't know about necessity, but given his trajectory and where he's been previously in his career and what the expectation and anticipation was for him this past season before he got hurt, his contribution would be a very important thing. And then, yeah, Tyseer Denmark, Peter Gonzalez, those guys were shaping up before the start of the season. They were grabbing attention, right? Buzzing a little bit in July and August. And so if those guys can be difference makers and make plays that otherwise hadn't been made with consistency, it's just, it's a uphill climb. There's a lot to be done there in terms of establishing that room and that position, that is going to require players stepping to the forefront that have not done so thus far, but also, like, necessary caveat, haven't done so because they've been hurt, because they haven't been in action. They haven't been part of the conversation.
Fitz, do you have any additional thoughts on that? Or do you want me to ask you one of the questions from the thread today?
I just think about the conversation that we have with wide receiver size, and you ask what's the best size for a wide receiver, a size combination for the wide receiver. The best size is a good wide receiver. Like, doesn't matter what size they are, fit them in there. So it doesn't matter if he's a transfer, if he's coming back, if he's a freshman, redshirt freshman, whatever. Like, just find the best ones and go with it. Now, there are layers to it in terms of bringing in transfers that you expect those guys to play. You have an expectation that those guys are going to probably bring a little bit more to the table than, your guys that haven't gotten it done to date. But at the same time, like, find the best guys and go with it until we see the spring feedback. Like, I don't think there's a general answer for this.
Yeah, I just the idea that you can be led by freshmen is it's a rare place, and I guess just from that perspective, if you have the idea that you have to get something out of both the freshmen or all three of the freshmen, John Brown, like, it just feels like it's a conversation where you're straying into dangerous territory. If I always say, if you're counting your ifs, you're in trouble. If Peter Gonzalez is able to play in the spring and gets better, if Tysier Denmark starts making plays, if you get something out of it, like, it just feels like there's a lot in the air right now. And some of the things that feel concrete are they brought in those transfers for a reason, and seeing their skill sets, they fit very specific roles. And if you're not starting there, it feels like there is a problem to the process, which could be wrong. Like, I could be wrong about that.
I mean, you got to know if they're good enough. Like, that's the thing. Like, you're taking a chance in the transfer portal at any position, really, to bring in somebody that either wasn't working out at his last school or just needed a fresh start. And you need to find out if it's going to work. And it's going to come down to scheme. It's going to come down to that sort of athleticism and talent. And this is a room that has to restructure. Like, there's no way getting around it. It has to be something different than we've seen the last 2 years.
Yeah, this receiver question is brought to you by redundancy. Redundancy this offseason. The one thing we're going to come back to is the Penn State receiver position. So, next question here. This is from Nittany on the Blue White Illustrated message board. He says, Penn State just hired Andrew Jackson and Greg Gattuso. They already have Torrance Brown and Deion Barnes as defensive line coaches and assistants. What do adding these new guys do for the program, Fitz? I don't think you need to get into specifics of what their job is going to be, but generally adding veteran guys to a position where you've got young coaches. What is the dynamic of adding all of these assistants on now these limitless coaching staffs, and how much of a benefit, or where is the benefit in your mind?
Almost limitless coaching staffs. But this is sort of the new college football staffing sort of like halo here, where your new assistant defensive line coach was the primary defensive line coach at a Power 4 program. Like, that's pretty crazy to think about, when you're talking about 10 assistants. Now all of a sudden you're talking about 25 assistants. It's very, very much a different avenue than we're used to seeing. Andrew Jackson has been here. He knows the lay of the land. He knows that, he knows what it's like to work for James Franklin. He was just here for a year, but still, you kind of know what it's like. And then you get different perspectives. Greg Gattuso, who was a fantastic defensive line coach for Pitt and then went to Albany for several years as a head coach, is going to give you sort of that old wise man type theory over top. But at the same time, Frank Leonard's been pretty awesome in that role in the offensive line. So yeah, you're developing different voices. You're developing different levels of experience and levels of perspective, really. So Gattuso, if he's going to be Yoda, that's great. That's what you want to see. But you also got a guy that, is very young, like Andrew Jackson, to work with Deion Barnes. Torrance Brown still trying to figure out what his role is going to be if he's sticking around. I think he's been here for 3 years, so his GA ship could be coming to an end here. I have to double check the dates on that, because everything post-COVID is the same year to me. So it's it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that, because it was just basically Barnes and Brown last year, and they did a heck of a job. Absolutely did a heck of a job. Torrance has a wonderful future in this business. But now you've got 3, maybe 4 guys that are running that defensive line room, all with, I think, pretty distinctive different roles. And Deion's still going to be at the top of that. But at the same time, Andrew Jackson was Power 4 defensive line coach. To have him as an analyst, I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, just the concentration of talent doesn't have to just be on the player side, although that is one of the biggest levers you can pull. Getting the most out of them is also very important. This last one here from
and going back to this, you've got a lot of different defensive linemen in that room. So think back to when Larry Johnson was the defensive line coach and he was the guy. If you're a player, you're going to have to be one of Larry's guys. Now, if you're a player and maybe you don't mesh with Deion like you thought you would, now you got Andrew Jackson. Now you got Torrance Brown. Now you got maybe Greg Gattuso. So like you see this, especially in the offensive line, when there's that many guys, and this isn't a, there's no evidence for some guy doesn't like Deion, whatever. This is a perspective type thing. you've got that many guys that you can find your coach. You can find a guy that you can confide in. You can find a guy that can make you happier being at Penn State. And when you're happier at Penn State, you're going to play better. So I think that comes into it as well. You're getting different mindsets from different guys. So I just wanted to throw that one in there, especially because we're talking about Frank Leonard and the offensive line and, the number of guys that they have there.
Two quick things here. We're out of time, but Ed asked a great question. He says, as has Tamir Robinson gained some weight, he always was a fascinating prospect. I'm expecting we're going to get an update to the Penn State roster here fairly soon, because if they're going to be introducing some of the freshmen, I'm expecting us to get that answer soon. So we won't get into that just now. But this one from Coin Intelligence Agency says, it's wild. I'm sure you guys have covered this. Why are these high-level guys coming over to be analysts? Nate, is this a general, like, oh my gosh, NIL, it makes this so much more difficult to be a coach, and I'd rather be an analyst, and now I can just be a coach? Or how do you view, I guess, this sort of Chip Kelly goes from being a head coach to an offensive coordinator, and now these guys are head coaches and defensive line coaches and now coming to be analysts?
Yeah, I think that certainly Franklin talked about it in Miami, and he was talking about Tom Allen and how the opportunity for some of these guys to take a step away from being a head coach, and in Tom Allen's case, it was being a coordinator, but I think it applies across the board. Being a head coach is running a corporation. That's all this is. It's a business with a different objective than Salesforce, but like you're managing people. And so the opportunity to get closer to the game and further away from all the other stuff, and especially at a place, at the lower levels where you're competing with, right, your best players are being plucked away.
Yep.
Right. Like all a good play, like you start with a good player and you get them for a year or two, and then the bigger fish in the pond see that player and they just take them right out from under you. Yeah, I think that is probably head slamming against the door type of existence. And so when you get up in age, in this case, and see an opportunity to disconnect and get away from that side of the profession and get back into the more X's and O's kind of stuff and like really dial in on that, I think it's an opportunity that guys see as favorable,
Right. Gotcha.
We talked about the arms race last decade with facilities and things like that, and it's all just moving to different spots here. Like it's moving to NIL, it's moving to this, and now assistants and talent on the staff is one of those arms races. So you're looking at getting these guys that you can find. It used to be analysts were cheap because they were still getting paid by the school that fired them previously. Now it's about, we're on the offensive here to add as much mind power, brain power as we can. So as Nate mentioned, what is the end game for Greg Gattuso at Albany? Like, it is so tough to run a program of that size, because it used to be, okay, signing day comes and a couple of your top guys get plucked by Old Dominion, like the smaller schools there. But now, I mean, it's like you ever play those games on your phone, and it gives you like the little fish game where the one fish eats the next fish, and then
that's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Well, that's terrifying. But it's one of those things where you just keep getting eaten by the bigger fish. And I know Ricky's dealt with it at Old Dominion. Like, it's just a hierarchy here of things with players, with talent and things like that. But it's also happening with coaches as well. Now, Andrew Jackson was unemployed. Like he was working for Neil Brown, did not get retained on the news staff at West Virginia. So you're looking at other options there. And that's something we reported actually a couple of weeks ago on Blue White, that he would be, considering the move. And then earlier this week said he was, or actually late last week said he was going to come on board. But it was, it's one of those things where you're trying to find the best available option. And if you have a familiarity with a place, with a coaching staff, with a style, then it really works out. And as Franklin said, there's guys that just want to coach ball, and that's what you find in these analysts here, because they don't have to go on the road, they don't have to go recruit. And I think some of the position coaches, their salaries may be a little bit bigger, but they look at that and say, wow, that's pretty it's pretty enticing right there. So yeah, I think that's where you're going with. And as you try and stockpile the top, just as you tried to stockpile the top 85 scholarships, you're trying to stockpile the top 25 coaches that you can and go with it.
So I think as of now, this is our last Monday show on the horizon as of now. But in case it isn't, make sure you're here on Thursday for the Blue White Illustrated live show so I can let you know at the very last second whether or not we're going to be here on Monday, Wednesday, whatever it's going to be. We'll be back on Wednesday with our recap of everything from tomorrow's media day. And of course, tomorrow you can check out a live replay of James Franklin's press conference moments after it ends right here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, which is your home for James Franklin press conferences on the internet. And of course, we'll have BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, all our extensive reporting, bringing you the conversations we have with some of those young players that you've been dying to get to know and get more insight on from the Penn State football program. It is a busy week here in February, which is not something I was expecting, but of course, Penn State football never sleeps, which is why you should join us. Talk to you.